The Rebbe Zolgezinstein began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today's Farbrengen is because it is Shabbos Mevorchim. And based on what the Prediker Rebbe instituted, that every Shabbos Mevorchim Hasidim should gather and make a Farbrengen, the same grounds we have the Farbrengen this afternoon, especially based on the quotation which the Alter Rebbe was related to us on behalf of the Alter Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe said that a Hasidische Farbrengen can accomplish more than what Malach Michal accomplishes. So from here we see the importance of a Hasidische Farbrengen. And regarding this month, the month which we are benching today, it is the month of Kislev. The month of Kislev, the Rebbe continued, is the third month from the winter months. In other words, when we count from Tishrei, Kislev is the third month. When we count from Nisan, Sivm is the third month. However, when we count from Tishrei, Kislev has this plus that it is the third month, the Chodesh HaShlishi. In the month of Kislev, amongst the many inyanim we have in the month of Kislev, one of the main inyanim is the Yontef of Chanukah. What is the Yontef of Chanukah? Yontef of Chanukah is we tzind the Chanukah licht. So regarding the Neiros, regarding licht, there's an expression in Chazal, HaNeiros halalu einon betelim liyolam, that these Neiros, these candles, are eternal and they will never stop. The Neiros Chanukah really come as a continuation from the Beis HaMikdash. And prior to that, the Mishkan. In other words, when the Rebishter told Yidden in the Mishkan, V'osuli mikdash v'shachanti b'seicha, that the Rebishter requested that the Yidden should make a Mishkan. Later a Beis HaMikdash, but prior to that it was a Mishkan. And that is where the Shechina will dwell, that is where the Rebishter will dwell amongst Yidden through the Mishkan. One of the major inyanim which were in the Mishkan was the fact that the menorah which was lit there on a daily basis. And as it's explained in Svarim, that the menorah expresses the idea of bringing light, the light of godliness into the entire world. In Ramban and Chumash we find, the Ramban tells us, in Parshas Ba'aloischa, when the Rebbeinu Shalom was telling Aaron HaKohen that he's appointing him to be in charge of the menorah, so there the Ramban uses the expression Shelcha G'dola Mishalahem, based on Chazal, that what Aaron is doing is greater than what the rest of the Nesiim did. And there we originate the expression of HaNeiros halalu einam betelim liyolam, that these neiros will never stop. What's the pshat that the neiros of the Beis HaMikdash will never stop? We know that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. First there was the first Beis HaMikdash. After the first Beis HaMikdash, it took a period of time between the first and the second, and then we had again the second Beis HaMikdash. And later the second Beis HaMikdash was also destroyed. So what is the pshat in the words of Chazal? That these neiros, these candles are eternal, they will never stop. They will be going on forever. So this means the neiros of Chanukah. Because even though now we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, the whole miracle of Chanukah all happened in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. So then the Yidden still lit, still had the menorah which was lit in the Beis HaMikdash. However, after the Yontef, afterward, the Yontef of Chanukah is still celebrated, even though we don't have the Beis HaMikdash anymore. How is it celebrated? By lighting the Chanukah candles. So what really comes out is that these Chanukah candles are a continuation of the menorah which was lit in the Beis HaMikdash. So when Chazal tell us HaNeiros halalu einam betelim liyolam, that these neiros will never cease, they will never stop, it's something which will go on eternally. It is by us fulfilling it today by lighting the Chanukah candles which we light during the Yontef of Chanukah. The Rebbe concluded that being that now we are entering this month, the month of Kislev, the month that has such special inyanim in it, we have to utilize this entire month with all the special days in the month, beginning from the Rish Chodesh, from the beginning of the month, and all the other special days which are in the month of Kislev, that all of these days should be utilized properly and according. Then the Rebbe continued that this is in effect regarding every Shabbos Mevochim Kislev in any year that Shabbos Mevochim comes out. That the Shabbos Mevochim comes out for every year. Shabbos Mevochim must always come out while we are still in the month of Cheshvan. While we are still in the month of Cheshvan, we always have the Shabbos when we bless the incoming month, which in this case is the month of Kislev. However, regarding today's date, it is not necessarily that always Shabbos Mevochim Kislev should be 27 days in the month of Cheshvan. This year, today, was Chav Zayin Cheshvan, 27 days in the month of Cheshvan. And here the Rebbe explained that regarding Chav Zayin Cheshvan, if we want to find something special regarding today's date, let us look into the Tehillim which we say today. The Tehillim which we say, we know Tehillim is divided according to the week and according to the month. According to the Shiurim of Chitas, it's required from us to say Tehillim daily, as Tehillim is divided according to the month. There is also, however, the way Tehillim is divided according to the week. In fact, the famous story that the Alter Rebbe, when he was in prison, and he found out that he's being released from prison, he was in the middle of saying Tehillim, and he was in the middle of Kapitel Nun Hey, and he was up to the words of Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, my soul is redeemed in peace. And at the moment when he was up to this Kapitel, that is when he was told that he's going to be released from prison. How does he come to say Kapitel Nun Hey on Yutes Kislev? It is because Yutes Kislev that year was on a Tuesday. And Kapitel Nun Hey is in the Tehillim of Yom Shlishi. So when he was imprisoned, he said the Tehillim. Not only the way Tehillim is divided according to the month, but also the way Tehillim is divided according to the week. Memela, it came out that on Yutes Kislev he should say Kapitel Nun Hey. Getting back to today's Yom, today we begin Kapitel Kuf Chav, and we recite all of the 15 Shir HaMalos in today's Yom. The truth is, the Rebbe added on, it is not only the Yom of Chav Zayin, but being that today is Shabbos, again the way Tehillim is divided according to the week, this also comes out into the Tehillim, in part of the Tehillim, as Tehillim is divided for the week, it's in the part of Shabbos. And with a brief introduction, Rebbe says we always keep on stressing that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week. Famous expression in the Zohar, Shabbos minei mizborchin kulhu yoimin, that the entire forthcoming week receives its blessing from Shabbos. So the way we learn it simply, it means that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire forthcoming 6 days of the week. But the question arises, what's with the following Shabbos? If Shabbos gives bracha into the weekdays, the Rebbe continues, then how much more so must we say that Shabbos has a power of instilling a bracha into the forthcoming Shabbos? What was last Shabbos? Last Shabbos was Chav Cheshvan, 20 days in the month of Cheshvan, which was the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. So it comes out, based on what we just said, that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week, that last Shabbos, which was Chav Cheshvan, gives bracha to the entire week which we just went through, also including today, the Yom HaShabbos. Especially, it's brought in writings from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe writes, there's a lengthy description in one of his writings how even after his father passed away, and his father was an Olam HaEmes, he saw his father in a dream, B'chizoyin Laila, and his father, the Rebbe Rashab, told him a Maimach Chassidus, and the Maimach Chassidus was based on the new incoming Kapitel Tehillim, which his father went into. In other words, the year which he went into had he still been living. In other words, this proves that even in Olam HaEmes, even in the world to come, there's still a shaykhis, there's still a connection and a contact with the normal routine of years and birthdays and so forth. And Memela, even though the Rebbe Rashab was already not anymore in this world, he told his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and Maimah Chasidus, based on a pasuk of the kapitel which he was going into on that year. We know that there's a Hasidic custom that we say every year, every day actually for the entire year, we recite the kapitel which is suitable to our age. In other words, if one is 20, he says Kapitel Chaf Aleph, which means he's in the 21st year. If one is 24, he says Kapitel Chaf Hey, and so forth. We say our own kapitel, and it is also known, there's the famous Hasidic minig, that we also say every day the kapitel of the Rebbe, L'arichis Yomim V'Shonim Tovos. So Mamela, based on that writing of which the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, it comes out that the kapitel of the Rebbe Rashab, in other words, continuation to Chav Cheshvan is his birthday. What kapitel is he entering? We are going out of kapitel Kuf Chav Vav, 126, and we are entering kapitel Kuf Chav Zayin, 127. Which, again, these kapitla are part of today's Yom, part of the Yom of Chav Zayin in the month. If we are to look in Tehillim, both of these kapitla, the Rebbe continues, both deal with the Geula HaAsida, the redemption which is going to come through Mashiach Tzidkein. Kapitel Kuf Chavav starts Shir HaMalos, as most of these kapitla do. B'shuv Hashem eshiva Tzion hayinu k'cholmim. When the Rebbe will bring back all of Tzion, and then our mouths will become full of laughter and so forth. This is kapitel 126. Kapitel 127 begins also with a Shir HaMalos, and there it continues, Im Hashem lo yivne bayis shav amlu bainav bay. That when could a house really hold up? It is when Hashem builds the house. If Hashem doesn't give strength into the house, then all the strength which people put in could go into vain. In other words, we need the strength of Hashem. So actually what is really behind Kapitel Kuf Chav Zayin? What house is it really referring to? The Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, which will be rebuilt when Mashiach will come. So what are these two kapitla talking about? The first kapitel is talking about the gathering of Tzion. In other words, taking Yidden out of Goles and bringing Yidden back to Eretz Yisrael. What is the second kapitel talking about? The inyan of rebuilding the third Beis HaMikdash, which this is how it's brought in Sfarim, that this is how the system will be. The system will be such that first the Rebbe will take us out of Goles. After the Rebbe will take us out of Goles, that is when he will give us the Beis HaMikdash. However, the Rebbe continues, this is how it is brought, how the regular routine schedule is planned to be. As he used the expression, Tmidin Kisidron. In other words, just like the Kol Tamid, which was brought in the Beis HaMikdash on a daily basis, on a clock basis, on a regular routine, the routine which will be when Mashiach will come, it will be such that first we will be gathered out of Golas. Then we will get the Beis HaMikdash. However, the Rebbe continues, this is only when we say we go according to the routine. However, there are times when it has to be, as he used the expression, musafim keil chasam. At times we have to add on musaf. Just like we daven musaf on Shabbos and Yontav, it means there's something additional. That's what stems from the word haisafa. Same the Rebbe says, at times there's a requirement. In other words, the situation is such that the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't have to go according to the routine schedule as long as he does it. And let it happen already. Memela, it could be that the Rebbeinu Shalom will build the Beis HaMikdash first, and then take us out of Golas. And when we come out of Golas, we will already find the Beis HaMikdash built in Eretz Yisrael. Though this is not the regular routine way, as it's brought in Sfarim, that this is how it will happen, but we find in a story which was related to us by the Frierdiker Rebbe, an act of the Alter Rebbe which was also done in a similar way. And here the Rebbe told the story that in the days of the Alter Rebbe and other Gedolei Yisrael were in dispute. This goes back when it was the war between Napoleon and Russia. Rebbe at other occasions told it with the names, with these details. The Alter Rebbe felt that it would be better for Yidden that Napoleon should lose and Russia should be stronger. Russia should win. Other Gedolei Yisrael in that time felt different. It seems like they all came to the conclusion, they all knew that the decision will be made who will blow shofar earlier on that Rosh Hashanah, and who will blow shofar earlier. And you can imagine the type of kavanah hashofar each one of them had together with the blowing of the shofar. He will be the one that his tefillah will be granted. So the way the story goes, that the other Rabbeim who had an interest that Napoleon should win got up very early and gathered their minyan, and they began davening on Rosh Hashanah very early with the intention that they should be able to blow shofar early. What the Alter Rebbe did, the Alter Rebbe knew that this was negay, it was important for the spiritual welfare of Yidden in that time, and the Alter Rebbe felt that it is more important that it will be better for Yidden. Yidden will be more devoted to the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs if they will not get under the influence of Napoleon. So Memela, the Alter Rebbe, woke up Rosh Hashanah in the morning and took his minyan right away, and rather than beginning to daven right away and rush to get to Tkiyah Shofar, what the Alter Rebbe did was, he blew the shofar right away in the morning. When the other Rabbeim, who were in distant cities away from the Alter Rebbe, finished davening Shachas, and it came to the blowing of the shofar, they expressed themselves. They saw in the distance what happened already. They were able to see in a different type of vision than we do. So they realized what the Alter Rebbe did, so they expressed themselves, in Yiddish, the Litvak. The Alter Rebbe they used to call the Litvak. The Alter Rebbe was a disciple of the Maggid, and the Alter Rebbe came originally from Lithuania. So amongst the disciples of the Maggid, they referred to him the Litvak. So they said in Yiddish, the Litvak hat uns ausgehabt. The Litvak already took care of it before we had a chance to do it. They planned it, that they should do it, and daven early. The Alter Rebbe did it different. The Alter Rebbe, schon ausgehabt, he already accomplished it by blowing the shofar. Though the Rebbe explained today, we know that Tkiyah Shofar has to have its time. And first comes the davening and the Kriyas HaTorah, and afterwards we come to the blowing of the shofar. But still we see that when the Alter Rebbe saw that it was a crucial moment, and this was the only way he was able to do something which will protect Klal Yisrael of that generation, the Alter Rebbe went ahead and blew the shofar before. The same the Rebbe says is regarding getting Yidden out of Golus. We have to get out of Golus. Would it be in the way of the normal procedure, as we see in Tilim, that first comes the kapitel of B'shuv Hashem Meshiva Siyon, and then comes the second kapitel which discusses the bayis, which means the Beis HaMikdash. But if it's not going to happen the routine way, then it could happen also the way which is not planned. The main thing is that it should happen. The Rebbe concluded, what is the lesson which we can derive from all of this? We know there's an expression in Gemara, Kshoit atzmacha, v'achar kach kshoit acherem. First beautify yourself, then you are in a position to beautify others. In other words, if you go out and criticize somebody else, you yourself have to be in a position of beauty. Perfect. Otherwise, how can you criticize somebody else? So the Rebbe says this is only in a time when we could afford this luxury of taking time and reaching out to other people. Now we are living in a generation where we cannot afford this. There's a famous letter from the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Shmaseidin, whose birthday was last week, Chav Cheshvan, where he writes, now we are living in a time, in a generation of chatoif va'achoil, chatoif v'ishti. We have to grab everything. We have to grab the drink and grab the food. What type of food and drink are we talking about? We're talking about it in the spiritual sense. Memela the Rebbe says, today when we see a Yid, and we feel that we can be influential on this Yid and utilize it and reach out to the Yid and bring him closer to any union of Yiddishkeit, we are no longer permitted to start making cheshbonis. Am I taki in such a position that am I worthy of criticizing somebody else? Am I capable of criticizing somebody else? Otherwise, am I taki in a position of kshoit atzmacha? Did I beautify myself already that I can go out and criticize others? Today it's no longer such a time. Any opportunity we have where we can reach out to another Yid and see to it that we utilize our influence on him, we must go ahead and do it immediately. Then the Rebbe continued, all of this is regarding the Shabbos in general. However, this Shabbos and Shabbos Mavachim Kislev and so forth in today's date. However, this Shabbos has something special to it. Specialty of this Shabbos is that this Shabbos is a kinus, is a convention of all of the shluchim. Bechlal, regarding shlichus, the concept of shlichus, we find it in Medrash. Medrash tells us that the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Kabdu es ha-mitzvahs, fulfill the mitzvahs, sheheim shluchai, because these mitzvahs are my emissaries. So if we really want to go back and find the expression of an emissary, it's the mitzvahs are the emissaries of the Rebbeinu. And it is brought in Svarim that every Yid was sent down into this world to fulfill a shlichus, and every Yid is a shliach. A shliach from the Rebbeinu Shalom. And we know shluchai shaladam k'maiseh, we are told in halacha, that when one appoints an emissary, his emissary has the same power as he himself does. So Mamela, a Yid is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sent down here by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to fulfill the shlichus of the Rebbeinu. And the shlichus of every Yid is to fulfill the mitzvahs of Hashem. And again, Chassidus teaches us what is the meaning of mitzvah. Mitzvah stems from the word, besides meaning commandment, tzav, it also originates from the word tzavsa v'chibur. It's an attachment. By fulfilling mitzvahs, we become closely attached with the one whose mitzvahs we fulfill. So in other words, it's a round circle. The Rebbeinu is the one who sent us as a shliach, and we are his shliach. Shluchei shaladam k'maiseh, we are closely associated with the Rebbeinu Shalom. By fulfilling the shlichus of the Rebbeinu Shalom, of doing his mitzvahs, we again become yet closer associated with the Rebbeinu Shalom. But being more specific, it is the Frierdiker Rebbe who has introduced the concept of shlichus. And the Frierdiker Rebbe's days, he would call in individual people and assign them various types of shlichus. The types of shlichus, he would specify to each and every one of them exactly what they are to do, where they are to travel, and exactly in what area they should get involved, in what area of shlichus he wanted every particular one of them to be involved. And the Rebbe spoke about it at length in today's Farbrengen, and he really explained, he said that years ago, it was much harder than today to come into a city, or a country, or an area, and get involved with people, and start influencing people. There were much more hardships involved, and there was much more interference. In today's day and age, the Rebbe says, there are thousands upon thousands of children who are not getting any Jewish education at all. And we don't have to go far to look for these children. The Rebbe says there are such children in New York, and in Brooklyn, and in Crown Heights. There are people and children who are totally estranged from Yiddishkeit, and it is our obligation to reach out to all of these people. And the Rebbe said furthermore, even though there are some shluchim that come into areas where they do experience some sort of interference, whether it may be somebody who, the Rebbe used the expression, some balei machloike, some people who are trying to start some sort of an argument or some sort of a dispute. The Rebbe says there's so much to do in the city. There's so much to do in that area. Don't even get involved with these people. You have, for the one child who is grabbed away from you, in other words, there's interference with one child, who people are interfering and not letting this child get close to you. There are 9 children who you could reach out to and have access to these children and teach them Yiddishkeit. And they would be more than thankful and appreciated and be very, very thankful for your getting involved with them and teaching them Yiddishkeit. As the Rebbe expressed himself, Halei kol ha'aretz lefanecha. There's a pasuk, a Chumash. The pasuk there talks, the Rebbe says, B'negei Eretz Yisrael. But he means it not only B'negei Eretz Yisrael, it's really applicable in this sense on the entire world. Ufaratzta, Yama, V'Kedma, V'Tzafayna, V'Negba, in every corner, wherever there's a Jewish community, in every neighborhood, in every yishuv, wherever there are Yidden, we have to reach out and see to it, to introduce Yiddishkeit to the Yidden that are there. The Rebbe says, even on the government level, there was never such a time when there was such cooperation from all government levels to fulfilling Yiddishkeit as we have today. And Memela, our inyan is to get involved and see to it that we should be able to reach to as many Yidden as possible. And the Rebbe spoke regarding the convention. Convention, the Rebbe says, we have delegates here from various cities and neighborhoods and areas and states and so forth. This in itself, that everybody gathered together, and now afterwards, the Shluchim will be going back. And when the Shliach gets back to his specific area, he relates that he met a Shliach from another area. And he tells the people in his community what's going on in this area, what's going on in a second area, and in a third area. All of this in itself, the Rebbe continues, brings a tremendous chizuk, a tremendous strength to the work of the Shluchim and to reach out to as many Yidden as possible all over the country and all over the world. The Rebbe expressed himself, he used an expression, he spoke up in Yiddish and he said, Fort of Shliches. He was speaking to everybody to go on Shliches, and the Rebishter will bench with Parnasa Ba'achava, with Nachas from children, and Nachas from Einiklach, gesunde children, and gesunde Kinder, and gesunde Einiklach, and he continued, and gute Shidduchim, and good Shidduchim for all of the children of those who will get involved and go into Shliches. And as the Rebbe spoke, he continued, he said that it was before Tafshin Yud. Tafshin Yud was the year when the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, and afterwards the Rebbe assumed leadership, L'Arichus Yomim. Before Tafshin Yud, the Rebbe says, he was not involved in this. But now, it came on him. Here the Rebbe seems like was trying to describe somebody, was talking about somebody who was a chassid, and he says he's a person who comes to Farbrengens, is pushed, and listens to what's discussed to such an extent that when things are discussed in the Farbrengen, later the Inyanim are reviewed, he's in the position that he remembers everything and remembers a lot which was discussed and corrects a word here, corrects a word there when it's discussed. In other words, fills in exactly what the Rebbe said. However, in this individual, when it comes regarding his own inyanim, he's successful. However, he has received a letter from him recently where this person writes to him that he would like to be appointed to be the head of chinuch, the head of education, on a national or an international basis. The Rebbe says he initially did not answer him on the letter. But when he doesn't answer somebody on the letter right away, he gets another one. And this person is out for this appointment. And again the Rebbe says this is a person that throughout the 35, 36 years, since Tafshin Yud, since the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, he never really saw him involved in any inyan as it should be. Involved in reaching out to Yidden, to children, to chinuch, and whatever level. This he never did. I think there was an expression that naturally he's concerned about, when the Rebbe was portraying this individual, he's concerned about him and he's concerned about his health, about the Rebbe's health. But at the same time, he really never got involved in really being into any inyan as he is capable of being. The Rebbe says when he has to find out information for himself or other type of things, then Rebbe mentioned he had to find out some information regarding some doctor, which is something which his wife could have even handled, but he did it all the ways himself. And when it comes to inyanim of getting involved, and the Rebbe says we're talking about Mesiras Nefesh, we don't even mean a Mesiras Nefesh of eating a late breakfast. Breakfast can also be eaten in time. But at the same time, this individual, throughout all the years, he never really saw him fully involved in any of his inyanim, and any of the inyanim which he keeps on demanding, which are really the shlichus of the Rebbe and of the Rabbeim and so forth. Then the Rebbe says he found out why he needed this appointment. He needed this appointment because this individual is involved in looking to get involved, or is involved in hechsherim, in giving a hechsher on a product. The Rebbe says, being he's going to give a hechsher on a product, whether it's milk or salt or chickens or whatever it may be. So that is why he's looking for a specific appointment, because the Rebbe says an appointment which comes out of here usually is not something secretive, something which is publicized. So therefore, this will not the right approach, and this is not the idea of shlichus, and this is not what all of this is meant. But again, Rabbi demanded very, very strong that now is a time where work for Yiddishkeit is welcomed and appreciated all over. And though, as mentioned, there are those that may be in some level, some sort of interference, but there's enough of an area to circumvent them and be involved in the spreading of Yiddishkeit and reaching out to children and reaching out to adults and getting Yidden familiar with Yiddishkeit and with Chassidus. And the Rebbe says, when you will finish all of your work of spreading Yiddishkeit and Chassidus in your entire area, that is when you will concern yourself with those who are starting up with you, with those who are causing some sort of a machloika around in that specific area where you are. But before that, there's so much to do and so much to be accomplished that there's really no need to concern yourself with those individuals who are trying to cause you some sort of interference in any way, because there, as mentioned before, for every one child which is taken away, there are 9 children that can still be worked with and bring them closer to Yiddishkeit, to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and to Torah. There were many, many more expressions in the Sinyan, but the main contents of this entire Sikha was how the Rebbe spoke of the importance of reaching out to as many people and children and individuals as possible and bringing them close to Yiddishkeit. And really, every one of us is obligated to do it in any type of opportunity, in any shape or fashion or manner we have, to reach out to any Yid possible at all times. And as the Rebbe explained, that when it comes to our inyanim, our own personal inyanim, then we are successful and we know our ways around, and then we know how to do things and to accomplish things, and we really accomplish whatever we want. However, when it comes to these inyanim, this is when we start becoming hesitant and thinking twice. The Rebbe explained at length, there's an expression based on Friedrich Rabbeim. In Yiddish, there is perl, which means pearls, which are worn as jewelry. However, there is also a certain kind of a bean which is put into a soup, which in Yiddish is also called perl. So the expression goes that the problem is that we satisfy ourselves with perl in the soup, and we don't get the real perl, which the real perl is perl, which is jewelry. And we all could understand the big difference, the huge richel ka'erech between the value of pearls which are a jewelry and the value of the pearls which are the perl, which are in the yoich. Yoich in Yiddish is a soup. And these beans which are put into a soup, it is naturally understood that the pearls which are worn as jewelry are by far more in value, and in no way could it be compared to the pearl v'sedor in the soup. And the problem is, the Rebbe says, that when it comes to once we hear the word pearl, we are happy, we satisfy ourselves with pearl. Now we don't get involved in differentiating that there's the pearl which is eaten in the soup, and there's the pearl which could be worn as jewelry. The same is when it comes to accomplishing yonim and spreading Yiddishkeit, we satisfy ourselves with anything that we have done. It's pearl. There's such a tremendous difference between the pearl which is eaten in soup as opposed to the pearl which is pearls which are jewelry. Jewelry is jewelry. And pearls which is eaten the soup has a very, very, no way could it be compared in value to jewelry. But this is the problem, that we comfort ourselves and we got used to it, that we are satisfied and we are happy as long as we have pearl. We have pearl, let it be the pearl in the soup, the pearl in the yoich, it's also sufficient. But this is where the error is. This is what we shouldn't do. Our goal has to be, we have to strive to be able to reach to the pearls which are worn as jewelry. It's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe also discusses a Rashi in the week Sedre, as well as the Rambam and the Shir Rambam, which is learned daily. Regarding the Rashi, the Rebbe raised 2 questions on 2 Rashis in today's Sedre. First one is where Eliezer relates about his trip. And Eliezer relating about his trip, telling them when he left Avram, Rashi comments that Eliezer had kvitzas haderech. In other words, Rebbe made a miracle, performed a nes, v'avei hayoim, that is in Kapitel Chav Daled, Pasuk Mem Beis. So Rashi comments, Hayoim yatzasi v'hayoim basi. Today I have left, and today I have arrived. Mikan shekafza loy haaretz. From here we see that the earth kind of like jumped towards him. So Rebbe asked, this Rashi is based on a Chazal. Chazal tell us, Pirkei de Rabbi Lezer, which is a Medrash. Medrash says that normally this trip was a trip, had Eliezer had to walk the trip, it would take him 17 days. The Rebbe seems like had an interest in performing a nes, and rather than it taking 17 days, took one day. Hayoim yotzasi v'hayoim basi. Today I have left, and today I have arrived. So Rebbe asks, why did the Rebbeinu Shloim perform this miracle for? What lay behind this? Whenever the Rebbe makes a nes, there's some sort of a reason for it. Rivka was a 3-year-old girl. Should we say that the Rebbe wanted to rush the fact that Rivka should marry Yitzchak, and Rivka should start building the family together with Yitzchak? This we can't say, because we know that after they were married for 10 years, it was 10 years after they were married, and they still didn't have any children. And here we find such a tremendous rush. Kafza loy haaretz. Hayim yitzasi, hayim basi. The earth jumped towards him that he should be able to have a very fast trip. Wait. This is all regarding his reaching Rivka's hometown. Now we had to travel with Rivka back to Yitzchak. Regarding him traveling back with Yitzchak, here we don't find already that there should be some sort of a nace, that the travel should be hastened, that the Rebbe should make a miracle, should go fast. So it seems that the way back was a regular way back, which took kind of like 17 days or so. So the way back, fine, was able to take time. There was no rush in the fact that Rivka should give birth to children from Yitzchak. Here the Rebbeinu Shloim waited 10 years. Until Rivka finally gave birth. Here, on Eliezer's getting to Rivka, the Rebbe had to make a nes, which should take him, instead of a trip which normally takes 17 days, he should be able to make it in one day. Why? What for? What's the reason for it? What's the logic for it? That's one thing. Then in the same Rashi continues, Amar Rabacha. Quotation on behalf of Ravache, Yofa sichosan shal avdei ovis lefnei amokim. The talk of the slaves of the ovis, servants of the ovis, is so dear by the Rebishter miterosan shal bonim, dearer than Torah which is taught by the children of Hashem. Why? Shari parsha shal Eliezer, this whole story of Eliezer, kfula b'Torah, is repeated twice in the Torah. It's repeated first how and what Avram told him when he appointed him to send him out on the shlichus, and then we also have all the details, what Eliezer related, what Avram told him. So everything is told to the precise detail in this week's Sedra. And when it comes to Gufei Torah, to many inyanim which are halachas and Torah, loy nitnu elo b'remiza, it is given only in a very hidden way. There are many halachas which we derive from one extra ois, or from one extra word, or even from one letter. Rabbi says that at previous occasions he already discussed this Rashi, but there's a very obvious question which he didn't discuss then, and it's extremely obvious. Here we are in Parshas Chayei Sarah. Parshas Chayei Sarah, that the Torah is telling us in such detail about Eliezer. Rabbi Ache comes up with a comment which is taken from Rashi, is taken from the Medrash, and Rashi quotes who's the author of this idea. It is Rabbi Ache. What does Rabbi Ache say? Yofa sichosan shel avdei avos, that we see how much psukim are spent on the entire trip of Eliezer. The Rebbe asks, if we go back previously, we go back to Parshas Noach, right from the beginning of the Torah, we find so many inyanim that are related in Yonim which obviously we cannot understand why the Torah tells us all about it. All about the different tribes which lived in and how long all of them lasted. All of this is discussed also in precise detail. And there, nobody comments anything. Obviously, if we are taking such an approach to see how much psukim, how much the Torah spends describing inyanim which are not gufei Torah, which are not inyanim of Torah, for example, an inyan of this, of like Avdei Avos, this whole trip of Eliezer, which is described to its fullest detail. And the Torah still describes it, and based on that, Rabbi Acha bases his statement how dear Sichos and Shalavis, how beauty are dear Sichos and Shalavis is Lefnei HaMakom. So why didn't Rabbi Acha say the same when it was discussed previously in the Torah, right in the beginning? The end of Bereshis, the beginning of Noach. In previous Sedras, we already have in Yonim, which we obviously also can't understand why the Torah tells us about them to such full detail, to such an extent. And still, there Rabbi Acher or anyone else doesn't comment anything. Why is it for those in Yonim they don't comment, and Dafka when it comes here to the trip of Eliezer that the Torah tells us in such detail, this is where he comes up with a comment of Yofes Sichoson Shel Avdei Avos Lefnei HaMakom. It is dearer or more beautiful Mitaros and Shalbon. Rabbi left these questions unanswered. Rabbi went back to discuss again the Rambam, which was discussed in last week's Farbrengen. It seems that during the week, in the various periodicals which are published, there were many that tried giving different type of answers on the question which the Rebbe raised last Shabbos, the Farbrengen. The Farbrengen of last Shabbos, the Rebbe learned a Rambam in Hilchis Ritzeach regarding the halachas of Ori Miklot. Ori Miklot means there are cities of refuge, which means if one kills somebody else unintentionally, which is called bishoygeg, then the killer has to run away to one of these cities and should be there ad mois hakoyen hagodel, until the present koyen gadol passes away. And while he is there, the goyel hadam, which means any of the relatives of the person who was killed, has no right to start up or kill this person. In other words, this is a city where he's protected. Chazal tell us that the mothers of the Koyanim G'daylim would bring food and all types of presents to the people in the cities of refuge, so that the people there should not pray for the Kohen Gadol to pass away. They would want, once the Kohen Gadol passes away, then they would be able to be freed and get back home with their families and relatives. But if the mothers of the Kohen Gadol treated them so nicely, then it's kind of like to comfort them, to suit them. But anyways, the Rambam tells us as follows, that the Ritzeach B'Shoigeg, the one who killed unintentionally, is not allowed to leave the city of refuge. Once he leaves the city, then the Goyel Hadam, that was the relative of the one who was trying to take revenge for the blood which was shed, is free to kill him. The Rambam says no one has the right, no Ritzeach can leave the city of refuge, no matter how he is needed. And the Rambam gives an example. He wants to describe how strong one could be needed. The Rambam gives the example, Ki Yoav ben Tzruya. Just like Yoav, who was the general of the army in the days of David HaMelech. He was the head of the armed forces, chief of staff, at the time when David was the king. So even a person in the capacity of Yoav ben Tzruya, if someone like Yoav ben Tzruya had to come to be in a city of refuge, he would not be allowed to leave. So the Rebbe asked last week, this halach is totally not understood. Why would a man like Yoav ben Tzruya have to leave? A man like Yoav would have to leave in order to protect lives, being that he was the chief of staff of David. And as the Gemara tells us, the only reason David was able to be involved in learning Torah so heavily is because he had a general like Yoav who he was able to rely on fully, that this general will be In case anything, any problem comes on Klal Yisrael, then Chas v'Sholem Yoav would be able to handle it perfectly. And David had this fullest trust in Yoav. Now what are we told? Now we are told, if a man like Yoav is needed, it's a question of pikuach nefesh. It's a question of saving lives. Why shouldn't he be allowed to leave his city of refuge? He definitely should be allowed. We know that for saving a life, how important Shvichas Damim is. The Torah tells us in so many ways we find in the Torah the importance of saving a life. Here the Torah says that a Rambam brings the halacha and he wants to describe what's called a popular or needed person. He gives an example of a Yoav ben Tzruya. Why shouldn't Yoav be allowed to leave? Furthermore, the Rebbe says, he's not so sure that Yoav can't leave. Why can't Yoav leave? Because Yoav, his blood may be shed through the Goyal Adam. The Goyal Adam is not going to get so easily a hold of Yoav. Yoav, being a chief of staff of David HaMelech, definitely had his cherev v'chanis, in other words, had his ammunition which he wore on him. He had the people that protected him. He was the head of an army. He was able to protect himself very, very well. So how can we say that a person like Yoav is not allowed to leave the Ir Miklot, is not allowed to leave the city of refuge? Why? Because his blood may be shed. In other words, he will no longer be protected. Why wouldn't he be protected? Because the Goyal Adam, the one who's going to take revenge for the one who was killed unintentionally, will go ahead and shed his blood. Rebbe says the Goyal Adam will never have access to a person like Yoav. Anyways, the Rebbe says he hasn't, from all the various answers which were written and were printed in these periodicals and were written to him, he really doesn't see an answer and he doesn't see a source. Why Taka the Rambam comes up with such a halacha that even a person who's as needed as Yoav ben Tzruya is not allowed to leave the city of refuge? The Rebbe says the only way he sees that the Rambam could be learned, and this is how we discussed it last week also, and today he added on an interesting comparison which we will get to in a minute. The Rebbe says in the Torah there's a concept of a gavre ktila. A person may be alive, but halacha considers him a killed person. For example, if a person is seriously ill, and we know that this person is not going to live much longer, and he is killed by somebody else, so the one who killed him is not going to be killed for it. Why? Because we apply this concept, gavre ktila kotal. He really killed a dead person. The person's clinically dead already. The only thing is he's still alive for another few hours. The same, Rebbe says, a person who is in an Ir Miklot, being that the Goya, if he leaves, a Goyal Adam can have access to him and is permitted to kill him once he leaves the Ir Miklot, this person is considered halachically a Gavre Ktila, a dead person. We will not go and save Klal Yisrael or make use of any person who's considered a Gavre Ktila. The Torah uses Yoav ben Tzruya as a general, but to use a general who is halachically considered a Gavre Ktila, this we will not do. And that is why the Rambam tells us that afilu he is needed ki Yoav ben Tzruya, he still will not leave the city of refuge. The Rebbe brought a comparison. There is a halacha in the Torah of Eidim Zoymimin, which means false witness. In what sense false? If we just give an example, if two witnesses show up and they are witness on somebody on a specific thing, later it is proven that they cannot be witness on this case because on that day and on that time when they say that they saw so and so commit this and this crime, they were in a different city. So how can they be witness on such a incident at the time they were not present there? In other words, they are not denied in the details of the story, just their complete witness is denied, as the halacha expression would go, Imanu hayisam, you are with us at that time. You were with us in a different city, in a different country. How can you be witness now on this particular case? You are saying that on this and this Tuesday and this date, you saw this and this happen, on this and this time, Tuesday, this and this time, and this date, you were in Europe. So the halacha is, V'asisam loy kasher zamam lasis la'achif. Whatever would have been the outcome of their witness, their punishment is that the same thing is committed to them. In other words, whatever they wanted to put on these two people by their false witness, the Bezdin, the Jewish court, does the same thing to them. Now we go a step further. There is a halacha, holgoy ein herogin, which means, if, as a result of their false witness, somebody was killed, they are not killed. In other words, the halacha goes, kasher zamam v'loy kasher osa. Only what they thought to do to somebody. But if it really happened already, then we don't punish them that way. Very halacha which requires an understanding. I mean, if we are punishing them for them being false witness, at the time they witnessed on something which they never saw happen, why are they only punished if in reality there was no reality to their there was no real outcome for what they really planned? But if there was an outcome, if it was really fulfilled what they planned, then they are not punished. How can we understand this? So there's a Ramban in Torah. The Ramban explains, once we see that these people, person or people, individual or whatever, was already killed, as an outcome of them, is a siman, this is an evidence that min hashamayim, the Rebbe wanted that person to be killed. They said false witness. At a time, they weren't even in that city or place. It didn't even happen when they were there, because witness now are telling us that they were in a completely different city at that time. This is the nayis of the Torah. Once we see it happened, is a siman the Rebbe wanted it to happen then. The Rebbe explained, Bechlal, when we spoke in general, we spoke it here, we spoke it again during the Teis Farbrengen, any union in Torah which we come across, we should not apply that this is a Gzeras HaKosov. If we don't understand it, we'll say, you know what, I don't understand it, I don't know the reason for it, but the Torah said so. If the Torah said so, I'm satisfied. No, we have to look for reason to try and understand why the Torah said so. We have to understand the reason behind every halacha. To learn Holgoy Ein Harogin, this halacha Vedem Zaymimin, and to say Stam it's a Gzeras HaKosov, this is what the Torah says, this is no derech on learning. We have to try and approach the most simplest approach possible. The Rebbe brought an expression called the Poshet Tvei, Mayel Tvei, which is most simple, is the best approach. And here we will accept the approach from the Ramban, which the Ramban tells us that once we see that it really happened, is a siman that this is the Ratzon Hashem, this is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The same the Rebbe says is here regarding the individual who's in the cities of refuge. This individual who is in the city of refuge, being that halacha tells us that once he leaves the city of refuge, his blood is free to the one who is a relative of the person whom he killed, he is considered halachically a gavre ktila, like a killed person. Torah will never tell us to make use in any capacity whatsoever, even in the capacity of a Yoav ben Tzchuya, from a person who is under the classification of a gavre ktila. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen after giving mashke to many people. There was a big crowd today who gave him bottles of mashke to the Rebbe for various functions which are taking place, and opening of new institutions and so forth, which are taking place in cities and various cities and communities and countries throughout the entire world. The Rebbe says that an indication in this week's Sedre for the concept of a Chabad house, we have in the Pasuk that Rivka was brought into the tent of Yitzchak's mother. Vayiviyeha oyala Sarah imay. So Rashi tells us that Chazal, based on Chazal, that all the good things which were going on in that tent while Sarah was alive, and later it stopped, Now that Rivka was brought into the tent, all of these inyanim began again. So the Rebbe says this is the same concept of a Chabad house. Any time a new inyan in Torah is added, and any new addition, any new introductions to any new inyanim in Torah and involving more people in Yanim of Torah and Yiddishkeit, all of this goes into the category, into the concept of a Chabad house. And here we have an indication in this week's Sedre also for the idea of a Chabad house, which the Rebbe keeps on talking about in the recent Farbrengens constantly, and asking that many, many Chabad houses should be opened wherever only there is a Yiddish community. A gute Woche.